Here you go with our next case study number 39 from CA Final, Audit MCQS and Case-Based Scenarios booklet issued by ICAI. You can download it from Institute website. Let's start with the case study. A special resolution was passed by Dunk Limited, an unlisted public company, for the purpose of conducting investigation into the affairs of a company by getting an order of central government for the same. The central government, on receipt of such application from Dunk Limited, supported by a copy of special resolution, did not deem fit to pass an order for investigation and thereby rejected such request. Thereafter, certain specified number of members of Dunk Limited made an application to the tribunal for seeking investigation, and the tribunal, upon being satisfied that such investigation was required, passed an order which was forwarded to the central government. On receipt of such order from the tribunal, the central government passed an order for investigation into the affairs of the Dunk Limited by appointing Mr. Rajesh as an inspector for the same, who is a practicing chartered accountant in a partnership firm named RS and Company. Mr. Rajesh started with the investigation into the affairs of Dunk Limited from 3rd of April 2021. All books and papers of Dunk Limited were handed over to Mr. Rajesh from 4th of April 2021. During the investigation, Mr. Rajesh considered it necessary to examine the books and papers of Bell Private Limited, Blue Bell Private Limited, a supplier company of Dunk Limited, while investigating on a particular matter relating to the purchases of Dunk Limited. Accordingly, Mr. Rajesh obtained the same through an officer of Dunk Limited on 20th of April 2021. Such books and papers of Bluebell Private Limited were returned by Dunk Limited on 5th of June 2021. But he again obtained the same on 20th of June 2021 by an order in writing due to certain reasons, which were returned on 25th of August 2021. Mr. Rajesh, at the latest stage of investigation, also initiated investigation into the affairs of Sync Limited, an unlisted public company, which was managed by 2 years ago by an ex-manager of Dunk Limited, Mr. Jayesh, as he considered it necessary to do so after obtaining required approvals. Mr. Rajesh examined on oath by summoning and enforcing attendance of the following persons: Mr. Jayesh, Mr. Urvil, a director of Dunk Limited, Mr. Sunny, an employee of Sync Limited, Mr. Rajesh, an employee of Bluebell Private Limited. The investigation the investigation in case of the aforesaid companies, that is Dunk Limited and Sync Limited, was concluded by Mr. Rajesh, but he only forwarded the report of the results of investigation of Dunk Limited after authentication to the central government. On pursuit of such investigation report of Dunk Limited, the central government observed that revenue of Dunk Limited was misrepresented during financial year 1920, as they were booking fictitious sales in anticipation of actual sales, and thus it concluded that the affairs of a company was mismanaged during the financial year 1920, which casted a doubt on the reliability of financial statements for the said financial year, and based on which it made an application to the tribunal for the purpose of reopening of books of accounts of Dunk Limited and recasting its financial statements. The tribunal passed an order on 12th of January 2022 for reopening books of accounts of Dunk Limited and recasting its financial statements for financial year 1920 on the basis of aforesaid reason, after giving notice to the central government for the same and taking into consideration the representations made by it in this regard. Okay. On the basis of the aforementioned facts, you are required to answer the following MCQs. Let's start with the first question: whether it was justifiable on the part of central government to reject the application of Dunk Limited even though it was supported by a copy of special resolution, and whether RS and Company could have been appointed as an inspector instead of Mr. Rajesh in order to have more manpower for the investigation. First and foremost thing, central government, if it feels that this investigation is not required, it can reject. So it is at the discretion of the central government. Anyways, it's not just the central government. Even if the tribunal feels it's not required, then it will reject. So the first and foremost thing that you need to remember is central government has its discretion to reject any application, not just the application of investigation. Okay, so first part of question is answered. Yes, the central government can reject at its discretion. And the second part of question is whether RS and company could have been appointed as an inspector instead of Mr. Rajesh. See, RS and company is a partnership firm. Mr. Rajesh is an individual. Now we'll go through the provision as to whether a firm or a company or a group of individuals or associations can be appointed as an inspector or not. Okay, let's go through the question like provisions once. So this is an extract from your study material. Who can be appointed as an inspector? Let's go through it. A firm, body corporate, or another other association cannot be appointed as an inspector. Thus, a firm of professional accountant cannot be appointed as inspector, but an individual accountant can be appointed. So, RS and company cannot be appointed since it's a firm. And that's where Mr. Rajesh, being an individual, can be appointed as an inspector. Now let's go back to the question. So let's see. We'll go through the each and every option given. Yes, as the central government possesses discretion to reject the application received from any person if it does not deem fit for investigation. So the first part of question is correct. And RS and company was eligible to be appointed as an inspector, which is wrong. So therefore option A is wrong. And option B says, no, the central government should have accepted the application as necessary formalities were complied with. So it is saying central government cannot reject the application just because the formalities were completed. So that is also wrong. The central government has its discretion, at its discretion can reject the application. Therefore option B is also wrong. Let's go through option C. Yes, the central government possesses discretion to reject an application, such an application, and RS and company was eligible to be appointed as inspector provided it has a minimum 3 partners. Who said it's a minimum of 3 partners? If you are a firm, then you are disqualified from being appointed as an inspector. Therefore, option C is also wrong. Option D says, yes, the central government possesses discretion to reject such an application and RS and company was ineligible to be appointed as an inspector. Therefore, option D is the correct option. Now, let's go through the next question. Till what time period Mr. Rajesh was having the authority to keep in his custody the books and papers of Dunk Limited and Bluebell Private Limited, which were obtained again? So it is speaking about the second time consideration. Second time Bluebell Rajesh obtained books of accounts of Bluebell Limited 2 times. We'll go through the question once. You'll understand. So 2 times it has received the books of accounts. So here the question is asking about the second time that you have obtained, right? So see, we have obtained books of accounts of Dunk Limited on 4/4/2021. and Bluebell Limited on 26/2021. Okay, let's go through the provision once. So here you go with the provision. Go through point number 3. Not to keep books and papers in custody for more than 180 days. So what it is saying, the inspector shall not keep in his custody any books and papers produced under subsection 1 or subsection 2 for more than 180 days and return the same to the company, body corporate, firm or individual by whom or on whose behalf the books and papers were produced. The inspector may call the books and papers again if needed for a further period of 180 days by an order in writing. So we observed that books were obtained 2 times for Bell Limited. However, the question is asking about the second time you taking the books of accounts. So for Dunk Limited, we received the date of receipts of records as 4th of April 2021. So from there, you need to count 180 days, which falls on 1st of October 2021. And for Bluebell Limited, you obtained books of accounts for the second time on 20th of June 2021. So 180 days from there falls on 17th of December 2021. Okay, don't just go blindly by the words in the question. Go carefully. You need to understand what is being asked in the question. See, the question clearly says, till what time Mr. Rajesh was having the authority to keep in his custody the books of and papers of Dunk Limited and Bluebell Private Limited, which were obtained again. So second time taking into consideration. So whenever you have received the Bluebell Private Limited books of accounts for the second time, you need to consider that time period, that date for answering this question. Therefore, it is 1/10/2021 and 17/12/2021, which is option C, and therefore the other options were irrelevant. So it's a straightforward question. So the question is asking, I'm repeating again, Bluebell Limited, which were obtained again. So it is speaking about the second time you getting the custody of books of accounts of Bluebell Limited. Okay. Let's quickly move on to the next question. For which of the following persons Mr. Rajesh was required to obtain prior approval of central government for examining them on oath by summoning and enforcing their attendance? So first let's go through who were called for examining on oath. Yes, here it is. So Mr. Jayesh is an ex-manager of Dunk Limited, and Mr. Urvil, a director of Dunk Limited, Sunny, an employee of Sync Limited, Mr. Raj, an employee of Bluebell Private Limited. Now, let's go through the provision here. So before we go to the actual provision, let's first read this first subsection, right? So, duty of officers and employees of the company towards inspector. Who are the officers and employees of the company? Let's go through the provision. It shall be the duty of all officers and other employees and agents, including the former officers, employees, and agents of a company which is under investigation. So, the company which is under investigation in accordance with the provisions and where the affairs of any other body, corporate, or person were investigated under section 219 of all officers and other employees and agents, including former officers, employees, and agents of such body, corporate, or person. So we were looking only till here, just because I need you to understand here. It is a duty of officers, employees, agents of a company which is under investigation. So in the current case, the company under investigation is Dunk Limited, right? Now we'll go to the other provision over here. So the fourth point says examine on oath. The inspector may examine on oath any of the persons referred in one above. So it is saying you can refer any person, you can examine any person on oath referred in one above. One above states former officers, employees, agents of a company which is under investigation. Company under investigation is Dunk Limited here. Okay. And continuing further with the fourth point, and with a prior approval of central government, any other person in relation to the affairs of a company or other body, corporate, or persons, as the case may be, and for that purpose may require any of the persons to appear before him personally. So if you want to examine any person which is outside of a company which is under investigation, so in the current case, Dunk Limited is the company under investigation and Sync Limited is managed by the former officers of Dunk Limited. So here Mr. Rajesh felt that he need to examine Bluebell Private Limited, which is a supplier company of Dunk Limited. So supplier company is outside the scope of the investigation. So if any person, if Mr. Rajesh wants to examine any person outside Dunk Limited or Sync Limited, then he need to obtain prior approval of central government. And moreover, Sync Limited only with respect to Mr. Jayesh, because he is a former employee of Dunk Limited. Let's go through the question again. So Mr. Jayesh, see, Mr. Jayesh is an ex-manager of Dunk Limited. Dunk company under investigation is Dunk Limited, so former employee is covered. And Mr. Urvil, a director of Dunk Limited, which means that he is an officer, former employees, officers, and agents of the company under investigation. And the third one, Mr. Sunny, an employee of Sync Limited. What is Sync Limited? Sync Limited is an unlisted public company which is managed by ex-managers of Dunk Limited. So therefore, it is a related company. So even Sunny is been covered in the first provision. Mr. Rajesh, an employee of Bluebell Private Limited. What is Bluebell Private Limited doing here? It is a supplier company. See, go to the second point. During the investigation, Mr. Rajesh considered it necessary to examine books and papers of Bluebell Private Limited, a supplier company of Dunk Limited. So, supplier company, you have no right to ask them come before you, and you need to examine them on oath. So what you need to do, you should obtain prior approval of central government if you want to examine Mr. Raj, an employee of Bluebell Private Limited, on oath. Therefore, the answer is option D, Mr. Raj. Okay, the question is asking, Mr. Rajesh, for which of the following persons Mr. Rajesh was required to obtain prior approval of central government for examining them on oath by summoning and enforcing their attendance? So it is Mr. Rajesh, because he is an employee of Bluebell Private Limited. Bluebell Private Limited is no more a related company, neither it's a company under investigation. Company under investigation is Dunk Limited, the related company is Sink Limited. Bluebell Private Limited company is a supplier company of Dunk Limited. Therefore, Mr. Raj, Mr. Rajesh, if he wants to examine Mr. Raj, then he need to obtain prior approval of central government. Then moving forward, whether it was justifiable on the part of Mr. Rajesh for not forwarding the investigation report of Sink Limited to the central government, and what type of fraud has been identified by the central government on pursuit of investigation report of Dunk Limited. So before we go through the options, we'll go through the provisions once. So here you go. The important issues to be kept in mind by the investigator while preparing his report are as follows. So what needs to be kept in mind before you issue a report? A report should not contain anything which is not relevant either to highlight the nature of the investigation or the final outcome thereof. So if any particular issue which is not related to the final outcome of investigation, or if it is not that important to highlight depending upon the nature of investigation, then the inspector can ignore that particular information, because it is annoying for the central government to look into each and every silly aspect. See, moreover, central government is not a person or a department which is sitting idle. It do have other works to concentrate on. So it would be annoying if you include all irrelevant matters which is not necessary for the central government to take a call on the investigation. Therefore, you should avoid anything which is not relevant either to highlight the nature of investigation or the final outcome thereof. Therefore, if Mr. Rajesh feels that it is not required, then he can ignore Sink Limited report. And moreover, what was the thing that central government identified from the report? See, on pursuit of such investigation report of Dunk Limited, central government observed that the revenue of Dunk Limited was misrepresented during financial year 1920, as they were booking fictitious sales in anticipation of actual sales. So they are booking advance sales. So advance income they are booking into their accounts. Now we'll go through each and every option slowly and steadily. So one thing is clear, Mr. Rajesh can avoid a report of Sink Limited in his final investigation report, because if he feels it is not necessary, as it is being issued clearly, you should not include anything which is not relevant. So he can ignore Sink Limited, that is for sure. And the other thing, what government observed, there is an advance sales booking into the books of accounts. Now let's go through the options. Option A says, yes, provided reasons for not forwarding the same or recorded in writing by Mr. Rajesh. Who said this? So there is no such provision that you need to record in writing why you are not sending the results of Sink Limited. So option A is wrong. Option B says no, as it's the responsibility of inspector to forward to the central government. No, it is not a responsibility. The responsibility says if anything is not relevant, then you can ignore. And then option C says no, because at the first place, Mr. Rajesh was not only having the authority to investigate into the affairs of Sink Limited and the type of fraud identified in the nature of teaming and leading. No, it is an advance billing, advance booking of income in anticipation of actual sales. And the other thing, the first part of question says you should not ignore sending Sync Limited report to the central government, which is not correct. Option D says yes, if according to Mr. Rajesh, such report was not relevant to the investigation of the affairs of Dunk Limited, and the type of fraud identified is in the nature of advance billing respectively. So the first part of the question is answered correctly, because if the Rajesh feels it's not relevant to the investigation of affairs of company, fine, yes, that is what the provision says. And the second thing, what type of fraud that is being identified, it's an advance billing. Now let's go through the next question. So option D is the correct option for the fourth question. Okay. Next question. Whether it was mandatory for the tribunal to take into consideration the representations made by the central government before passing an order for reopening of accounts, and till what financial year tribunal can make such order of reopening of accounts. Okay. Now let's go through the provision before we move on with the question. So here you go. Reopening of accounts on courts or tribunals order. Section 130 of Companies Act 2013 states that a company shall not reopen its books of accounts and not recast its financial statements unless an application in this regard is made by the central government, the income tax authorities, the SEBI, any other statutory regulatory body or authority, or any persons concerned, and an order is made by the court of competent authority or the tribunal to the effect that the relevant earlier accounts were prepaid in a fraudulent manner, or the affairs of company was mismanaged during a relevant period, casting a doubt on the reliability of financial statements. Okay, fine. Now the main point comes. The order for reopening of accounts not to be made beyond 8 financial years immediately preceding the current financial year, unless and until government has, under section 128 subsection 5, issued a direction for keeping books of accounts longer than 8 years, reopening of accounts can be made for such longer period. However, a notice shall be given by the court or tribunal in this regard and shall take into the consideration the representations, if any. So what the provision says is, if you have received, if an application is being made by the central government or income tax authorities or the SEBI or any other statutory regulation body with their recorded reasons, whatever the representations from received from these persons by the tribunal, it can reopen the books of accounts. However, there is a bar on how long you can reopen. So it's only the 8 financial years preceding the current financial year. It is mentioned current financial year. It is not mentioned the financial year under investigation. Observe this. It is the current financial year. So, and if the government has ordered to retain the books of accounts beyond 8 financial years, then you can, the tribunal can order reopening of books and recasting of financial statements to that years. So that's not the case, because under the current situation, there is no such provision or no such direction under section 128 subsection 5. Therefore, we'll ignore that. So we'll go through the question. So we'll go through the question once. Okay. So Mr. Rajesh started investigation into the affairs of Dunk Limited from 3rd of April 2021. So the current financial year falls. See, where you have prepared the financial statements. Financial statements were prepared for the financial year 2021 just now. So the current financial year is 2021, FY 2021. From there, you should go back till 8 years. Now let's see the calculation that I have made. So the current financial year being 2021, because 21-22 just started, you won't have any books of accounts to review or investigate into. Okay, the current financial year is 2021. Go back 8 years from there. So the last year till which the tribunal can order its reopening of books of accounts is FY 13-14. Therefore, we'll go to the question options once. We'll see which is the correct option. Yes, here you go. So option A says, before we go to the options, so first thing, it needs to consider the representations made by the central government, and the second thing, it can reopen till FY 13-14. That is what we have understood from the provisions. Now we'll go through the options. Option A says no, it was discretionary for the tribunal to take into consideration the representations made by central government. Is it at the discretion? No, it has to consider the representations made by them. So option A is wrong. Option B also saying it cannot. So no, provided reasons for the same. So even that is wrong. Option C says no, it was discretionary for the tribunal. So there is no option called discretionary, or you need to record your reasons in writing. So the option A, B, C says it is either at the discretion or you need to record in writing, which is not the case with the provision. Therefore, option A, B, C were wrong. The first part of the answer is wrong. Now we'll go through the option D. Yes, it was mandatory for the tribunal to take into consideration the representations made by central government, and the tribunal can make such order for reopening of books till financial year 13-14. That is what we have observed. It needs to take into consideration the representations made by central government, and the next part is it can reopen only to an extent of 8 financial years preceding the current financial year for which you have prepared the books of accounts. So current financial year being FY 2021, 8 years preceding this financial year falls on FY 13-14. Only till then tribunal can order a reopening of books of accounts and recasting of financial statements. With that, I hope we have completed this. Yes, with that we have completed the case study number 39. We'll upload case study 40 along with this as and when this has been uploaded. Sorry for the delay, but yeah, I'll complete it and I'll upload it today for sure. Thanks for watching. If you feel these videos were helpful, please do like, share and comment. Help your friends and give them a chance to revise as quickly as possible. Thanks for watching.